All right. Well, I'm so happy that my friend, and I'm a big fan of yours as well, Dweezil Zappa is here
Thanks for having me, Brad.
to have a little chat.
Yes.
If you're not familiar with Dweezil, I don't know where you've been in the last however long, but
10 minutes.
we're going to start with a little video show kind of what he does.
I'm curious to see what I do.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Basically a guitar hero, for sure.
I guess. Yeah.
So let's start by just giving us a little background on what you're up to now, what you've been doing the last few years, that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, as it relates to QSC and the stuff that, the reason that I'm here talking about music and what I do live on stage, you know, my guitar rig is basically a direct system. You know, I use the fractal for the guitar sounds, which is a direct to the PA kind of experience for the engineer and for the audience. But on stage, I need to be able to have that spillover sound as a direct source for the audience, because if not, then if you were in the first few rows, you might be hearing the music from behind you because it's coming directly from the PA. And because I use this digital modeling system with those fractals, you need something that is going to be a very full range and a flat response so that you can trust the sounds that you're making. And that's why I ended up with the QSC monitors, because they could reproduce the sounds in a way that sounded like all the time that I spent into it, you know, it would reproduce it, and it was very consistent, you know, and that's the best part about being able to have that on a daily basis, you know, and the fact that you guys are located worldwide, it helps out when you get in a pinch on a tour and you got a problem or you need some help with a piece of gear or something. So it's been a great way to have a partnership with a company that makes good stuff.
Let's talk a little bit in detail. I'm a guitar player, so I'm super fascinated with what you do and your rig, and I've seen your pedal board and stuff, and it's insane if you ask me.
Well,
talk to us a little bit about just all the different options and the sounds you create and the sounds you kind of need to have access to, you know, on tour and what, you know, what you're trying to reproduce, that sort of thing.
Well, my dad, when he was recording in the studio, it was a time of total imagination and creation. He was mixing and matching all kinds of different equipment and trying different things, and most of the time he was splitting his signal 3 or 4 different ways. He was using a DI and multiple amplifiers and lots of different effects, and to recreate those sounds really down to like the DNA level, I needed to switch to a digital processing system like the Fractal, because it allowed me to do things on that DNA level, but without having to carry refrigerator-sized racks filled with all kinds of stuff that you got to plug in a million cables, you know. So over a period of time, I've started to find the combinations that I really like and that I use the most. But anytime we change the set list and I have to, do a recreation of something that he did, it's a challenge, So my system is basically 2 stereo paths that I can use in a way where I can pan stuff in the stereo field any way I want with different pedals. It's like being at a mixing console, but with my feet on stage. So I can pan stuff and I can add different effects and I can change the blend. I can add a clean DI and do all kinds of different things as I want, and it helps with the creative process when you're playing, because sometimes you can create a sound you've never played on before, and that's inspirational. You play different stuff.
Yeah. Talk about just preparing the latest tour you're on. I know you did Zappa Play Zappa for a while, and then the one you're on currently, I guess. Aren't you? You're going.
Well, I still do a show where I play my dad's music, but I had to change the name of it because members of my family decided that they wanted to only use the name Zappa Plays Zappa for themselves. So it became a weird situation, and so I just changed it to Dweezil Zappa. And there's another part that goes with it, plays whatever he wants, Yes. But anyway, it's... I play my dad's music. I play my own music. I'm doing collaborations with different artists and working on lots of different styles of things. But ultimately, it's with technology as it is, it's a really good time to be able to stretch the boundaries of anything that you want to be able to do, especially on the guitar.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about just your speakers. I know you went over it. 2 Axe effects, stereo out into 4 KW-122s that are kind of right behind you, firing at the first few rows.
Right, and they're separated so that there's, the widest ones are the widest stereo, and that's usually where I put the more distorted sounds, and anything that has like a modulation or a doubling effect, that stays out wide. And then I have the inner stereo pair, which can be a more focused sound. Like if I wanted to blend a clean sound with a distorted sound, just enough so that you get this sort of 3-dimensional, it feels like you can hear all the way around the strings. It's a really cool, detailed setup. But again, I can change the panning of that at any time, and I can do whatever, add effects to one machine that don't go to the other. I mean, there's like parallel paths, and there's a lot to it. I mean, it's a very confusing setup for somebody that just wants to plug and play.
Right. Yeah, I remember visiting you and you showing me all the stuff you're doing, and it's like, how do you remember this?
Well, you just get used to the bit of the tap dance that's required, but I know what sound I'm looking for, and it's labeled pretty well.
Yeah.
But even so, you still got, some things are presets and some things you can just build on the fly.
Right. Let's talk about, I know it seems like you have a heart for education and guitar teaching and that sort of thing. Can you talk about where that desire came from and what you're kind of doing?
Well, as a kid, I always watched my dad playing, and I knew that if I was going to try to do anything like what he did, you had to know a lot of stuff. I wasn't ready to know a lot of stuff back then. I was like, I'm just going to start with what I can kind of do on my own. And then over a period of time, I would start to learn more and more about the actual name of things. And whenever I found something that was inspirational to me, I was always keen to share that information with other people. And so when I started doing all the Zappa Play Zappa stuff and people were curious to know, well, how did you go about learning all these difficult things? I ended up, instead of having to constantly explain it, I said, I'll just set up a camp and I'll teach some of that stuff. And I created a camp called Dweezil. And so we've done that a few years. And then I also do guitar lessons on tour sometimes before the show. But it's just something that I wish I would have had access to that kind of information. And now you do to a degree with the internet, but there's still something when you get to learn something face to face that really makes a difference.
Yeah, yeah. So, am I right that Eddie Van Halen taught you how to play Eruption?
Well,
Or
I got
something
to
like
meet
that?
Eddie Van Halen early on in my guitar playing, and I got to see him play that stuff up close. But he didn't sit me down and say, okay, here's how it goes,
Yeah.
and show me note for note. I was able to see the techniques that he was using, and that made a huge difference because that's way before anything like the internet, you know, or now you could just type in Eruption and you can see a million people show you
Show you how
their
to do it,
version of it.
And slow it down.
Right,
and
right.
all that, yeah.
But back in 1982, you know, he came to our house, and so he plugged in his guitar, and I was like, play Eruption. You know, so he played that and Mean Streets and some other things that were impossible to figure out unless you could see what he was doing.
Right, right.
And that made a huge difference.
Yeah, that must have been so inspirational.
It was really cool, you know. It was like the only thing that I could sort of give you an example of is it's like if you were in that situation and you wanted to learn that stuff, but you know you didn't have any way of ever seeing it, and then the person who knows how to do it is right there. It's almost like you have your own toy Eddie Van Halen. You're like, I will make my Eddie Van Halen play, you know, and so it was like this surreal thing where it was so cool.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So we'll wrap it up now. But
Sure.
if we can kind of just know what you're up to in the near future and how we can stay in tune with what you're up to.
Well, you can always go to dweezilzappa.com, and there's music and things you can check out on there. But we have a tour of Australia that starts in a few weeks, and then a U.S. and Canadian tour that starts at the end of March. That's about a 7-week tour, so we're getting ready for a lot of live performances.
A lot of touring. Yeah, so if you're hit his website, you've got to see him play live if you haven't. It's an unbelievable show.
Thanks.
Yeah, and thank you for being here. Let's give Dweezil a hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
And you're gonna stick around for a few minutes to chat. And
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
do some-